Well, it's Thursday, and that means it's time to get a take on the news from the left, right, and middle. From the left is political blogger and professor at Medgar Evers College, Wallace Ford. And from the right is Washington attorney Horace Cooper. Hello, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Horace.
Well, of course, you know, it wouldn't be right if we didn't talk about the fallout from the latest grand jury decision to not indict a police officer, this case being Eric Garner in Staten Island. And amongst those who have criticized this decision, they've also criticized the grand jury process itself and the way it's been used in modern day. So here's my question for you fellas, and that is, should the grand jury system be discontinued? Should it be abolished in some way? Let's see. Wallace, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I'll put on my lawyer's hat for a moment here and speak to the process. It is it's a systemic issue that we're looking at, not a structural issue. I would submit to you that right now we've got the United States Department of Justice under Eric Holder, Attorney General Eric Holder, looking into the civil rights implications in Ferguson and in Staten Island. The Department of Justice came out with a ruling with respect to excessive police force in Cleveland. The list kind of goes on. I would submit to you, though, that the Attorney General for President Mitt Romney would not be pursuing these types of activities. And my point is that it's not just the structure, it's who's in that structure. The district attorneys in both Ferguson and in Staten Island had a predisposition to come up with the kind of results that they wanted, and they got it. Just like you can indict a ham sandwich as a district attorney, you can also see that ham sandwich walks away scot-bite-free.
And Horace, what's your perspective?
Well, I guess we don't agree on that.
Surprise, surprise.
I think that the grand jury is an essential tool that protects liberty and protects individuals. It's not that long ago, now none of us were alive, but the Scottsboro Brothers case demonstrated why you need an independent team of people who can review and hear information and, if necessary, decide not to. In that tragic case, nearly a dozen young men were ultimately given the death penalty because a little scrap fight on a train car led to false claims that they had somehow raped a young white lady. The community refused to tell the truth. The prosecutor believed it was in his interest to go forward with it. The judge did. We needed a system. This case went 3 times to the Supreme Court. We need the reliability of having the citizenry in a community have a say rather than just rubber stamping whatever charges prosecutors bring forward. Well, I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, we don't disagree on this point. I'm saying there should be the grand jury process can work, but it depends on who's doing the working, and that really is the point. Just as you pointed out with the Scottsboro
And to Wallace's point, Horace, I want you to speak on this. Wallace said very often it's the participants, if you will. That's my word. That was not the word that he uses in the system. And so I guess what I want to know from you is your perspective about how grand juries are used today, because prosecutors, particularly in these 2 high-profile cases just in the last week, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, have in some ways used the grand jury to avoid executing their own duties to prosecute what could be seen as a crime.
This is exactly the problem that I've been watching so many people come forward and make these misstatements. It absolutely is not the case that the grand jury got in the way of the prosecutor doing his duty. It absolutely is the case that the purpose of the grand jury is to decide whether or not, when the government is singling you out for prosecution, whether that is merited. That's the reason you need a grand jury. And the evidence in the Michael Brown case shows us what a lie Dorian Johnson and a number of other people said about what had happened. It is absolutely not the case that we want a system where prosecutors are the final say on whether people's liberties are placed at stake.
But again, Horace, with all respect, we're still missing the point, which is the participants are important. Remember that the grand juries in both Staten Island and in Ferguson were predominantly white. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, starting with the fact that a lot lot of black people don't participate in the voting process, and they're not on the voting roll, so they don't wind up in the grand jury process in the first place. But just let me finish, please. I mean, so again, it depends on who's involved. One can really argue that the prosecutor in the Ferguson case should not have been there. His father was a policeman killed by an African American. You cannot tell me, no one can tell me, that he does not walk into that situation between Officer Wilson and Michael Brown with a predisposition to basically, he's saying, if my father had done what Darren Wilson had done, my father would have been alive today. You know, and so there should have been. And so it's not just the process. It's not just the structure.
I am very disappointed. I'm very disappointed to hear you say that.
Okay.
Lawyers take an oath. Yep. They take an absolute
humans.
oath
Lawyers,
to
believe it or
stand
not,
up.
are humans.
Then we will never fix this if you're going to tell me that people can't stand apart and be responsible. There is no such thing as saying we can guarantee that we're going to get an all-black grand jury or an all-black jury. You can't ever guarantee that.
No one's suggesting to guarantee that, but you can't tell me that the prosecutor in the Ferguson case was not predisposed to letting Darren Wilson walk free.
No, he wasn't. No, I don't have any evidence of that. But what I do know is,
you know his life story. You know his personal narrative.
It is unfair to characterize those whites on the grand jury as being unwilling to review this case without any ability.
It's a heck of a coincidence, isn't it, Horace?
No, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that six people came forward who were black and said, please don't tell my name because I saw what Doreen Johnson was saying to the media and to the police, and it was a lie.
Okay, and here's the thing about all of that. None of that was subject to cross-examination. I think a lot of us are saying it's not a question of whether or not.
There you go again. No. You're making up a critique of the grand jury process.
No, you do not have
actually undermines the concept.
Horace, now you know they don't.
But Horace, wouldn't you admit, though, at least the approach that Bob McCullough used in the Ferguson case was unorthodox?
I will not admit that.
Okay.
I absolutely will not admit that.
No matter how loud you say it, Horace, it still doesn't make it true.
It's not about being loud.
Okay.
I've personally studied the grand jury process. I have actually testified before a grand jury. I understand and comprehend how they're supposed to work, and I've been very frustrated by the critiques. What people are really saying is they don't like the result. But when they say it,
reality remains,
they imply,
Horace, and we're going to have to bring this conversation to the end. The reality remains a lot of your peers do say that it was unorthodox, and we'll just have to leave it right there for now. Thank you so much, Wallace Ford and Horace Cooper.
Much.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Yeah.